So now that you've seen a little bit about how we can use JPA to implement some of the methods very declaratively, not a whole lot of code to be written, let's go and take a look at how we sometimes need to write custom queries and the means by which you do that using the programming APIs that come with Spring and the JPA. And we're also going to give a bit more of an overview of the Spring Data API. So what is the Spring Data API? It's a framework that simplifies the development of data access layers in Spring-based applications. In this particular case, the data access layer is accessing the quotes database that has the Zippy quotes in it. And the way it works is developers write repository interfaces that define data access methods that they need. And the way that they do this is they can use these various keywords. So for example, you can see stuff like containing or ignore case. We use both of those. Order by, that's one you'll need to know for the next assignment. Not like, not in, and so on and so forth. And then what happens under the hood is that Spring automatically generates the corresponding SQL queries that relate back to these keywords and the way you string them together, and also the way that you refer to various columns by using names in the methods. So you can kind of see that that's what happens under the hood. The good news is, in general, if you're lucky, you don't have to know how SQL stuff works, which is not that complicated, but why do it if you don't need to? So in a sense, it reduces all the boilerplate code you needed to implement persistence and data access in job applications. And it's a little bit like, if you're familiar with the buzzword low code, no code. Low code, no code really refers primarily to GUI interfaces where you can drag and drop your programs and build them. Probably, if you ever played around with Scratch Junior, if you were a kid, you might have used a low code, no code style environment there, where you drag and drop stuff. You actually are programming it just visually. So this is kind of like that, but it's not really GUI based. Although I guess you're arguably using your IDE GUI to do this, but it's kind of in the same vein. It means less writing of complicated code. So given that, you might think, gosh, we're done. We don't ever have to worry about writing custom SQL queries. Wrong. And the reason for that is that there are limitations in the JPA and the Spring Data API to combining these keywords that are supported by the JPA. So there's a bunch of keywords, but they don't all go together all the time, and that can be a little bit frustrating. For example, for somewhat mysterious reasons, which we will see if we can clarify a little bit, it's not possible to combine containing, which is where you're looking for basically wildcard matches within some kind of column or field. You can't combine that with in. So we'd like to have containing in, so you can't take a list of things and then look for containment. And I was very perplexed about why that was the case, and I tried Google searching, trying to understand why you couldn't combining and in, and good luck with that one. I was unable to find Google search. It never could give me an answer because there's so many other things that talk about containing and in, but not why you can't use them. So then, of course, I said, why not? Let's see if ChatGPT will save the day. So I asked ChatGPT, why can't Spring Data API methods combine containing and in? And it gave me an answer. I'm not sure it's necessary. I mean, it's the answer. I'm not sure whether it's really the only way to look at the problem, but basically it said you can't combine them because they're not compatible with each other. And they say containing is used to search for records that contain a specific substring in a field, which is correct, while in is used to search for records where a field matches one of several specified values. And then it says you would end up with conflicts and confusing semantics and so on and so forth. I'm not entirely sure that that's the best explanation, but that's what it was able to come up with, which was better than any Google search I ever did. I should also point out that now that I've been using ChatGPT for a couple weeks, I find myself wanting to have a conversation when I Google search. And it's so funny because you sit there and you're like, when you talk to ChatGPT, you ask it a question, it gives you an answer, and then you kind of iterate with it and you say, well, how about this? How about that? You have this little dialogue. And of course, with Google search, as it is today, doesn't help. You type in a long-winded query, maybe you get back something useful, but you can't go and say, well, how about this, right? Because it doesn't remember from query to query what the heck you were doing. So at least there's a win there. So anyway, moving on. Let's talk about the multi-query repository as a means to overcome the limitations with the JPA. And the multi-query repository defines an interface for creating a custom query. This is something that we wrote. This is actually Sergey came up with this. It's very clever. And so we have an interface multi-query repository that defines the means to perform multiple queries at once on the quote database. And then we're going to handwrite this code. So I came up with this somewhat convoluted name. This is what I would like for the Spring Data API to do for me with keywords, but it won't, so I just had to write it myself. So it says, find all by quote containing ignore case all in, which is marginally coherent, and yet can't be generated automatically by putting those keywords in that order. So then what we did is we took the multi-query repository and we implemented it using the multi-query repository impl. And that is actually a realization, an instantiation of the so-called repository implementation pattern. And it turns out in Spring, when you write your implementations, if you put the word impl at the end, then Spring knows that this class is implementing this repository, and it knows how to kind of connect them together, which is cool. And you can read about the repository implementation pattern at the link down here. I found the name for this thing by using none other than ChatGPT. I asked, what's the pattern that is used to implement this? And it said, it's the repository implementation pattern. And I said, where can I find out more information about this? And it gave me that link. So I thought that was pretty cool. So here's basically what we'll do. We're going to look at this in more detail when we talk about the code here in a second. But we have to implement a field called an entity manager, which is basically a database session that gives you a single point of access for performing CRUD operations and querying the database. And then we implement the find all by quote containing ignore case all in method with a bunch of calls here. And we'll take a look at that code in just a second. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I got that code. It was first done with help from Sergey, who did a great job of getting me part of the way there. And then I used the wonders of ChatGPT to refine the implementation to make it super concise and very, very powerful and very cool. So we'll take a look at that in the next part of the lesson. So that's the end of this part.